Hi everyone, welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. So this is sort of a chit-chatty discussion video about an amazing and book-filled sleepover that I had this weekend, in which I discovered Tamora Pierce and continued to read Anne of Green Gables. And all of this prompted me to think about the concept of series versus standalone books. What is my personal relationship with series? What makes a series successful in my opinion? And what is the purpose of a series as opposed to a standalone book? So some backstory, this weekend was one of my college friends' birthdays, and to celebrate, me and a few of her other undergrad friends traveled to her house in New Hampshire. And we helped her cook all sorts of wonderful foods. We baked her a birthday cake, of course, and there was mac and cheese and punch and apple cider, and everything was just so delicious. And we also went on a tour of her house and saw her library/office, which is heavenly. I really hope that someday I can have a room like that in my house. She has so many wonderful books, including all of her favorite childhood series. I think she had a copy of every book that Tamora Pierce has ever written, as well as all of the books in the Anne of Green Gables series, and she had a few other series that I hadn't heard of and I can't remember right now, but those two series stood out because, well, Anne of Green Gables, I'm reading it right now with Laura from Narglecatcher. I'll link her channel down below, and Tamora Pierce's series stood out because all of the girls at the sleepover were huge fans of Tamora Pierce when they were younger, and they were talking about her, and they said they love rereading her books. And I admitted that I had never read Tamora Pierce, and they were like, "What? Oh my gosh, you have to read Tamora Pierce. Right now, go upstairs, grab a book, and start reading." So I've heard a bit about Tamora Pierce on BookTube, but I never really had the desire to pick up her books, mainly because they were YA, and I generally don't like YA. But I trust all these girls' opinions, and we each grabbed a Tamora Pierce book, and when we weren't cooking, we would read the book. So I picked up the first book that they recommended, which is the first in the Lioness Quartet series, Alana, the First Adventure. And I finished the entire Lioness Quartet this weekend, and I left New Hampshire with a list of all of Tamora Pierce's other books and the order that they suggest I read them in. So as I said, I'm also in the process of reading Anne of Green Gables, and Laura, when I was going to read this with her, she asked, well, okay, would you like to read the first book, or do you want to reread the whole series with me? And I said, well, I don't know if I'm ready to commit to a whole series. Can the first book stand alone on its own? Do I need to read the whole series to really grasp what's going on? And she said, no. I mean, I think the first book will do just fine. It can stand on its own. It doesn't end with any giant cliffhanger or anything like that. So you can probably just read the first book. So right now, my plan is to just read the first book of Anne of Green Gables. But reading these children's series, or young adult series, in the case of Tamora Pierce's books, really got me thinking about series. I don't read many series. I think the only series I've ever finished has pretty much been Harry Potter. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can refute that with anything. But other series, I've started them before. Most of them were children's series. Things like the Boxcar Children, Redwall series. I think I read a few of each of those. The Giver, I read that book and its sequel, I believe, Gathering Blue. Most recently, I think I've read Jasper Ford's The Air Affair, and I read the second book in that series, but I never moved on to the third, and I don't know if I ever will, and I also don't know why. I think mainly because I thought personally that the second book sort of just dropped and went downhill, and I don't really know if I want to see where the third, fourth, fifth, I don't remember how many books are in that series. I don't know if I want to see where it's going. I think I might just want to hold on to that memory of the first book. I also read some other series like the Dear America series when I was younger and the Nancy Drew series when I was younger, where I think that they could really stand alone as their own books. Same with The Orient Express, and I read a Miss Marple book. And those also sort of stand on their own. I think mysteries lend themselves to that there's character development over time, but you don't really need that character development when you're so focused on the mystery. And the Dear America series, I mean, Nancy Drew goes along with the mysteries, and the Dear America series, it's about a different time period each time. It's about a different set of characters. You don't need to have read the last one to read the next one. So books like that, I don't feel a need to read the whole series, and I don't think that anyone really has to. It's kind of fun, actually, to jump around within the series. And then, of course, there are other series that I didn't finish because of a time gap between when the next book came out. And that, for me, would be the Series of Unfortunate Events. I loved those books, but I never finished them, and it's mainly because I sort of grew tired of them probably around the 10th one, before the next one was coming out. I read it, and it was okay, and I did want to know the overarching plot, and I wanted to go forwards, but by the time the next book came out, I kind of forgot what happened in the series, and I didn't feel like rereading the whole series, and I just never picked up the book. So I realized that I just don't really read that many series, and I would greatly prefer a standalone book to a series. So something else that strikes me about series is that writing a series must be very difficult. I think that from a writer's perspective, they would just be hard to write. You have to keep the books going, you have to keep them linked together, but at the same time you have to have each book stand, to some extent at least, on its own. I think that a series would just be way more difficult to write than a standalone book, and I think a series would also be more susceptible to plot devices and tropes that readers complain most about. Things like love triangles, underdeveloped characters that function as plot devices, plot developments that are just simply too convenient and too coincidental. I think it's just really easy for series to fall into one of these categories, and to depend on overused tropes or devices to keep the story moving from book to book. Another thing that I noticed about series that I don't know if I like or dislike, but it's just something that I've sort of noticed, is that many of the series I've heard of are all YA. And why is that? One idea that I had is that many YA books can be considered Bildungsroman or coming-of-age type stories, and a series is actually a really effective way to show a passage of time and some character development. So I think in that way a series can be really useful as a strategy. However, that's not to say you can't have a standalone book that plays with time in really inventive ways. There are so many standalone books that do that. And I mean, Jane Eyre is a wonderful Bildungsroman coming-of-age story, and it doesn't have a sequel. It didn't need a sequel to do that. And that might also explain why a lot of series are sci-fi or fantasy, that they need to feel more epic. I think another interesting point about series is that perhaps a series functions in a way that you don't need to recreate the world each time you write a story. So if you want a world in outer space with very particular aliens and things like that, you explain it all in the first book, and then you can just keep going from then on. You expect that your reader knows the details of the world. And I guess as a writer, that is really useful if you want to keep writing about that world. Something else that I thought about while reading the Lioness Quartet was that sometimes when a story is plot-driven and suspenseful, you can actually have a false sense of security while reading it because you know that your main character isn't going to die, or there wouldn't be other books. So, for example, in the Lioness Quartet, I wasn't actually scared for the main character's life until the last book, because no matter how bad things got, I knew she was going to live. And yes, there are plenty of other characters to kill off or remove from the story for one reason or another, and you can't predict those, and that is part of the excitement. But there's still that assurance that your main character is going to stay safe. I think George R.R. Martin has been credited for breaking this pattern in his work. I've only watched the TV series for Game of Thrones, so I cannot speak to the book. But I feel like in the TV series, there are so many different characters that killing off a few of them or even a lot of them doesn't hinder the story from continuing. Another thing that scares me about series is that there is a danger as you continue reading. There's always the chance that the subsequent books will ruin the original that you liked so much, that they'll add a new plot twist or a realization onto the original that you don't agree with, and they'll just mention something that sullies the whole original story for you. That's actually one of my biggest fears while reading a series. It's also why when I hear that a sequel of one of my favorite things is coming out, I get excited, don't get me wrong, but I also get very hesitant and very anxious because I'm worried that it won't live up to the original, or even worse, will destroy my opinion of the original. I thought the Lioness Quartet was a wonderful series, but I wish I had found it earlier. As someone in their mid-20s, I don't think I'm the target audience, and I found some aspects of the books to be too predictable and trite for me. I still like the series as a whole, though, and I was definitely a fan of the plot premise. I mean, a young girl is disguised as a boy because she wants to be a knight, and she ends up changing her world and becoming a legend. And that's really intriguing to me. It's very Mulan-esque, but of course there are plenty of details that would distinguish it from Mulan, or really any other series for that matter. So I thought that was very successful. And my inner child really identifies with Alana, but at the same time, I know that I'm looking at the series as somebody who may one day have kids, and it has so many powerful messages for females and males as well about relationships, both platonic and romantic relationships, and what it means to be strong, what it means to be respectful of others. So those are some thoughts of mine on series. I, as I said, prefer standalone books because of many of the things I've mentioned, but I am aware that there are some really great series out there and that there are people who absolutely love series. So I'd really like to hear your opinions on series, the concept of series, sort of why you think they exist, what their purpose is as opposed to a standalone book, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!